It was a freezing cold night when RMS Titanic's lookouts, high up on the mast and the crow's nest platform, spotted the iceberg ahead. In fact, they didn't even really see it, rather they described it as a lack of stars against the sky. It was so dark that the berg just blended right in to the sky and sea ahead. With just over 30 seconds to react, the crew tried to get the ship out of harm's way, but it was too late. Shortly after the ship had sunk, in New York City, the first inquiry was chaired by a US Senator, William Alden Smith, and he asked many of the crew and passengers what they thought had happened. Two of the ship's officers testified that if they'd had a spotlight that night of some kind, it would have helped them sight the berg sooner. And the thing is, it was an unusually dark night. Moonless, as they say, when the moon is hidden by the Earth's shadow and blacked out. Coupled with the rare calm, where the water was as flat as a garden pond, the crew stood very little chance of spotting the iceberg in the first place. Ice can be seen from far away when there's a moon. The light will reflect off its white surface, but if there's no moon, then the waves lapping at the berg's base can be spotted too. So, would a spotlight have helped? The chances are that the officers are right, and that yes, in those unusual, specific conditions, a spotlight might have helped them. But the truth is that powerful lights like that mounted on the front of the ship can be more dangerous than they are useful. Ship's crew rely on their eyesight for safe operating of their ships at sea, and they've done that for centuries. Lookouts were prized, in the days of sail, for their excellent vision. A skilled lookout could spot a ship on the horizon and then determine its type and home nation when, to you or I, it might have looked like a small white speck. At night, lookouts were employed to keep an eye out for tiny signs of friend, foe, or danger. The slight flicker of a lantern off in the distance, for example, or if the navigation was completely off, the telltale roar and white foam of breaking waves on the shore ahead. For this, lookouts needed excellent night vision, the ability to pierce through the darkness and discern what it was that they were looking at. By Titanic's day, and even today, things had not changed much. Sharp vision is still very much prized, but so is night vision. Being able to figure out what you're seeing ahead or to the side of you at night is absolutely paramount for a few reasons. First, for navigation. Beacons and buoys floating on the surface mark crucial channels and water lanes like highways, where ships of different types and sizes should sail. Seeing them through the dark will ensure safe passage, but if you miss their telltale location, the ship may be headed for disaster. The running lights of other ships at night are critical as well. Ships have lights positioned in specific locations to help identify which direction they're heading in. The port, or left side of a ship by the bridge, has a red light, and the starboard, or right-hand side of the ship, has a green one. And then another light is positioned way up high in the ship's mast or antenna. From a distance then, other ships can see what direction you're heading in. For example, if you can see just red, then the ship is heading right to left. But if you can see all three of those lights at the same time, then the ship's heading directly at you. But if the ship had big spotlights fitted like the headlights of a car, suddenly the night's darkness ahead would be made murky by the powerful spotlights. You couldn't make anything out. The crew's night vision would be ruined, and nothing could be seen at all. Channel markers or other ships' lights might go unnoticed, leading to disaster. It's the same situation when it comes to obstacles or dangerous conditions ahead. A searchlight on the bow of a ship might only be useful for a few rare times in a ship's life. If it was on all the time, it would be a massive headache for the crew who are trying to see way ahead of their ship. Night vision is so prized that on liners of Titanic's day, anything forward of the bridge was blacked out. Lights either were shielded or turned off to preserve night vision ahead. Titanic was actually fitted with deck lamps all over the upper decks to provide 360 degrees of ambient light, but the ones closest to the bridge were fitted with a shroud so that the light couldn't shine forward and ruin the crew's night vision. Night vision was so prized, in fact, that the Titanic's helmsman, who was the man actually at the steering wheel or helm of the ship, was kept in a special room called the wheelhouse, which was then fitted with shutters so that the light of the room wouldn't spill into the main navigating bridge and ruin the crew's night vision. On modern passenger ships, the conditions are actually the same. One of the most quiet, dark places at sea on a big cruise ship is right at the front towards the bow, where things are kept in the dark. But of course, on the bridge of a ship, you still need to see what you're doing, so red light can be used to light areas up without ruining night vision. So it's often used, especially on warships and submarines, to preserve crucial night vision for the crew. But spotlights and searchlights on ships have come in very handy indeed. In fact, contemporary ships to Titanic were built with a kind of headlight. It's likely that on the night of Titanic's sinking, even a low-powered spotlight mounted near the bow might have helped illuminate the iceberg earlier. But in deciding to use it in the first place, the crew would have surely been extremely nervous at having their night vision ruined by the light. If Titanic was actually fitted with a searchlight, I doubt they'd have even used it at all, because that night's conditions would probably have been one of the absolute few and rare times it might have ever come in handy. Another time might have been in the fog. If a ship is surrounded by dense fog, lighting the way forward with a spotlight might, at the very least, warn other ships in the immediate vicinity of your presence. This, and the Titanic's recent loss, must have been front of mind to Albert Berlin and the designers of the German ocean liner Imperator in 1912. The ship was designed and built in Germany, and featured a very prominent carbon arc spotlight on the forward mast, a huge thing almost level with the bridge. Carbon arc lamps are extremely powerful things. They're actually the types of light that are used in the spotlights that you see from the World Wars. Imperator probably received her spotlight to reassure passengers more than anything else. It's unknown if the thing was ever used because, of course, sailors trusted and preferred their night vision. Imperator and her sister Vaterland are two of the only liners I can think of that sported this kind of light. But recently I came across this beautiful painting by maritime artist Kenneth Shoesmith, who is an absolute legend of his craft. It shows the British liner Asturias transiting the Suez Canal in the 1920s, and shining out of the actual bow or front end of the ship is something you could almost certainly describe as a headlight. This is an example of a Suez light, lights fitted to ships specifically for transiting through the Suez Canal. Now, it's such a narrow body of water that one wrong move could result in stuck ships. So seeing ahead in the days before radar technology was crucial for safe navigation here. And in fact, ships to this day are still fitted with searchlights specifically for this one purpose if they are expected to navigate their way through the Suez. Spotlights are extremely useful on ships, but not just for lighting the way ahead. You'll see them mounted on warships to this day, extraordinarily powerful things. They can do two things. First, they can flash signals to friendly ships when using the radio might be inadvisable. And secondly, they can shine into the darkness and around the ship and light up any potential hostile threats in case they're sneaking in close to engage. In the Second World War, the naval battle of Guadalcanal was fought at night time, and it was a complete shambles, with examples of friendly fire in the confusion. But crucially, searchlights were used to illuminate enemy targets in the dark and guide the heavy gunfire. The Japanese destroyer Akatsuki and the battleship Hiei used their massive carbon arc lights to illuminate the American cruiser Atlanta at almost point-blank range, but it had an unintended effect. The light revealed the Japanese ship's positions, and Akatsuki found herself marked out as an easy target. She was engaged by 6 American ships who could see her in the dark, and she was smashed with gunfire, and she blew up shortly after. So clearly, using spotlights at sea can have unintended consequences both in peace and wartime. So how do ships see in the dark today safely? Well, it turns out that we actually have a piece of technology that is more effective at piercing through the darkness than the human eyeball. Radar relies on electromagnetic waves, sending pulses which are reflected by objects ahead, sent back, and mapped out in clear vision, be it day or night. With this, a modern ship could spot anything well ahead, and in fact, modern-day vessels carry different types of radar for different uses and distances. If Titanic was carrying a radar, her crew would have sighted the iceberg from miles away. In fact, modern radar can sight targets from 24 nautical miles or over 40 kilometers distance. It's estimated that Titanic's crew only spotted the iceberg from about 1,500 feet, or just shy of 500 meters. An interesting exception to the headlight situation at sea are icebreakers, amazing ships that we actually covered in an earlier video, but these beasts are fitted with powerful searchlights all over them, because unlike a normal ship, they are actually expected to be in contact with the ice and obstacles while they slowly steam ahead, so the crew really need to see what they're doing. So why don't ships have headlights? Well, Some do, but it turns out for the vast majority, the human eyeball is just as good. We know that from history, lookouts prioritize their night vision over any kind of artificial light that might be able to help them see a little bit further ahead. In war, they were useful for signaling to friendly ships, but using them in battle could be extremely dangerous. And as for ships today, we don't really need to light the way ahead. Radar does it for us, seeing many miles into the distance for us and keeping our modern shipping safe. You've planned all year for the big cruise. You've boarded the ship of your dreams, you've checked out your cabin, you've dropped off your bag, and now you're heading up to the top deck to take in the view and grab yourself a cocktail. You're here to relax and indulge, and the safety equipment on board the ship is probably the last thing on your mind. And fair enough too, because you're here for a good time. But that said, if you're a little bit nervous and you were wondering just about what kind of safety equipment there is on big ships like this, then why don't you grab a glass of something chilled, put your feet up and get ready for your safety briefing as we run you through all the equipment you should expect to find on a ship in the case of emergency or disaster. In the early days of ocean travel, safety was almost an afterthought. Ships' boats were essentially decorative, but as time went by and ships got bigger, technology improved to the point that safety at sea could actually become a genuine area of study and regulation. It's fascinating stuff. All ships have to carry emergency life-saving equipment, so today strict regulations for this have been developed over the past century with the SOLAS Convention, regularly updated to ensure that mandatory requirements for the carriage of life-saving equipment and appliances on board all passenger and cargo ships are followed. SOLAS stands for the safety of life at sea, and the convention is regarded as the most important treaty for the safety of merchant ships today. Now, it outlines and outlaws the minimum requirements for ships' safety equipment based on the size, the voyage, the ship's intended role, as well as passenger and crew numbers. So life-saving equipment and appliances, including lifeboats, life jackets, life rafts, communication systems, distress signaling tools, they're all required and they're of the utmost importance. Now, the simple fact is that for the majority of a ship's career, none of this stuff should really ever truly, hopefully, be needed, all things going well. But unfortunately, not all things go well. The original concept for SOLAS was devised following the most famous maritime disaster in history, the Titanic. We've talked a little bit about it on this channel before. SOLAS was drawn up in 1914 in response to the Titanic disaster some 2 years earlier, but it was not universally incorporated into international maritime law thanks to the outbreak of the First World War. Originally, SOLAS covered things like lifeboat capacity for all on board and so on. While many countries included the recommendations from the first convention into their own maritime law, it took nearly a decade after the war for the SOLAS Convention to be adopted internationally, all the way later in 1929 when the second agreement was signed. Now, just as ships are subject to rigorous rules and regulations during their design and the construction process, the life-saving equipment and the apparatus required on board ships are just as firmly checked and regulated. The International LSA Code for Life-Saving Appliances provides specific technical requirements for the manufacture, the maintenance, and the record keeping for each life-saving appliance. Now, requirements differ from ship to ship, with minimum standards outlined in order for a ship to be considered safe for its passengers and crew in the first place. Now, this is no easy task. Modern cruise ships, like Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas, now carry up to as many as 10,000 passengers and crew at maximum capacity. Now, when you think about all of this, it means if something goes wrong on a ship that big, how on earth could they go about evacuating it safely? Well, thankfully, things have changed a lot since Titanic's day, and every person on board needs to be accounted for in terms of their safety. So let's go through all the ways that's done. Now, first of all, the primary piece of equipment that all ships have to carry are, of course, lifeboats. Now, we're all familiar with lifeboats, and they do come with all ships as if they're part of the furniture, but they're more than just that. Lifeboats themselves are vessels. They're launched and used in the case of extreme emergency, when a ship needs to be abandoned. Modern lifeboats come in different shapes and sizes. They're generally constructed from durable, lightweight materials like FRP, which is a fiberglass reinforced plastic, and aluminium. Now, these materials are chosen for their integrity and their strength, their ability to withstand the harsh marine weather conditions. They're also extremely lightweight. The boats are designed with inbuilt buoyancy and stability, with buoyant material all throughout the hull, the watertight compartments. Stability is also incorporated into the design, with most lifeboats being able to self-right and stabilize on their own in case they're flipped over. So all lifeboats carry rations including fresh water, first aid supplies, navigational tools, and equipment for distress signalling. Now, in compliance with all those regulations, the maximum number of people a lifeboat can carry safely is dependent on the space available to ensure the comfort and safety of the occupants. So, big ships like the Queen Mary 2 have huge lifeboats big enough to carry up to 150 passengers. Now, it's not just about the size and the number of lifeboats that's important, it's also important where those lifeboats are kept. One half of the ship's boats are kept on the starboard side, the other on the port. Regulations dictate that nearly the entire ship can be evacuated from either side independently as quickly as possible in the event that the ship was to list too far over for one side's boats not to be able to be used. Now, there are actually 3 different types of lifeboats found commonly on ships. We've covered this a little bit before in the past. The most common lifeboat is the enclosed lifeboat. Now, these are designed to provide the best possible protection against weather and extreme conditions. Enclosed lifeboats are basically watertight, and these are the ones that are able to self-stabilize. Now, their self-sufficient life supports are built in, equipped with everything needed for survival at sea. Their covers are fully enclosed. They're made with a fluorescent or reflective material, so they have very high visibility. It serves as protection from sun, wind, and rain. They're also actually designed to collect rainwater, and they have onboard engines as well as sails, so they're completely self-sufficient. They're basically their own little ships. Most lifeboats on ships are secured on deck and to the side with huge davits. Now, they're lowered by these davits, which are essentially a crane with a winch system, over the side of the ship, which lowers them down smoothly at a very controlled speed. Now, the open lifeboat, as its name suggests, has no roof and is generally propelled manually using oars or with a small engine. Now, open lifeboats are becoming less and less frequent on ships as safety requirements become more stringent. As you can imagine, they aren't much help in rain or hazardous weather. They won't keep water from getting in. However, there will generally be a percentage of open-top lifeboats allocated to larger ships for dual purposes, like ferrying passengers on excursions or to spots where ships can't dock as tendering. Now, big passenger ships typically carry smaller inflatable open-top boats, which are much faster than those bigger enclosed ones. This is a kind of emergency boat, which is perfectly adept at rescuing a passenger, for example, should they accidentally fall overboard. The final lifeboat is one that's really interesting. You may not be aware of it. It's called the free fall lifeboat. These are typically not found on passenger ships, more so big oil tankers and things carrying dangerous chemicals. They're designed for if you need to get away as quickly as possible. Now, these are usually found at the after end of the ship at the stern, and they're designed aerodynamically so that they can be just launched into the water without damaging the boat's hull or jeopardizing the safety of the occupants inside. The boat free falls from a ramp, which provides propulsion to get it well away from the ship as quickly as possible. Now, they're designed, of course, with the capacity to self-right themselves, and they're fully enclosed and watertight, with shock-absorbing seats, as well as harnesses to keep all the passengers inside safe, but I'm sure it's still a wild ride. Now, the secondary means of saving lives at sea are kind of like the little cousin of the lifeboat, and that is, of course, the small yet mighty life raft. And rest assured, despite its small size, these things are basically almost just as important. If you've ever walked along the deck of a ship and wondered what those large fiberglass cylinders that look like big oil drums on their side are, the answer is they're simply a kind of life raft. Now, these are normally located in an open part of the ship near the lifeboats. Unlike boats, which need to be slowly lowered over the side of the ship, these can be deployed basically in a moment's notice. They don't need to be rigged to a davit, they can be evacuated from the ship without any kind of manual launching, and they're designed with auto-inflate systems as well, using carbon dioxide cylinders packed inside a container within the raft, so there's no time wasted trying to blow the thing up. Modern life rafts are designed with the capacity to stay afloat and exposed to all sea conditions for up to a full month. Now, these little lifesavers are put through a number of tests to ensure that they can endure all conditions and continue to go. They go through drop tests, jump tests, weight tests, towing, damage, inflation tests, pressure, seam tests, strength tests. It's exhausting. But the rafts and their contents are designed very robustly so that they can continue to operate after being dropped into the water from a height of 18 meters. That's about 60 feet. On top of that, they should be able to withstand people jumping onto them from a height of about 4.5 meters. That's about 15 feet with or without their canopy. Now, bubbling around in the ocean, waiting to be rescued, means that you're exposed to harsh conditions of the sea, of course, and one of the most important design features on a life raft is its canopy, with 2 layers of material separated by an air gap that should provide some insulation and protection against heat and cold. Now, like lifeboats, life rafts also contain all your essential items that you'd need to survive at sea, including the usuals like life jackets and provisions, but even things like pyrotechnics and flares. Now, ships carrying a davit launching system will allow a ship's crew to inflate and get people boarding a raft on deck, helping avoid taking on seawater if they must be inflated and boarded at sea level. But life rafts can be launched via a hydrostatic release unit, which connects to the raft container and will release even after a ship has sunk. As the ship sinks, once submerged to depths of about 4 meters, water pressure will activate the raft's release mechanism, and it will inflate and rise to the surface all by itself. Now, the first thing you think of when you think of having to abandon ship and being stuck at sea is wearing a life jacket. Now look, we might all be at least a little bit guilty of ignoring the safety demonstrations aboard airplanes and cruise ships, but you might want to pay attention to this next bit, because the life jacket is basically the most important piece of your survival kit in the short term during an evacuation. While life jackets come in many shapes and sizes, the ones found on cruise ships and merchant ships are designed to be worn while abandoning a vessel to keep you afloat for long periods of time, with features designed to help keep you alive and attract attention. Now, those found on ships are generally made with solid closed cell foam and inflatable material. When inflated, the life jacket becomes 45% more buoyant, helping the person float higher and become more visible to rescuers. Now, you can blow it up yourself, the old-fashioned way, like a balloon, or using a carbon dioxide cartridge or a combination of the two. As ancient as it seems, life jackets are fitted with whistles to help survivors attract attention from rescuers. Now, they're also fitted with a light which illuminates as soon as it hits the water to allow for easier detection. Similar to life rafts and other life-saving equipment, life jackets are subject to extensive testing, including temperature, cycling, buoyancy, fire, stability, and strength tests. Now look, even if you've survived abandoning your ship, now you might have to spend hours bobbing around in freezing water, and it doesn't really take very long at all for things like hypothermia to set in. So immersion suits, also known as survival suits, are the next step to surviving after life jackets, and it's a key function to help keep you warm. Now these are designed to have high warmth retention. Wearing an immersion suit will help you reduce your body heat loss for anybody in cold water and hopefully prevent the onset of hypothermia. For someone floating in waters with temperatures of 0 degrees Celsius, for example, a typical suit will help keep the body temperature from going below 35 degrees Celsius for 6 hours. Now, these suits are made up of water and fireproof buoyant material with reflective tape strips fixed on arms, legs, and the torso for visibility. Despite looking a little awkward to wear, they're designed so that they can be put on without assistance within 2 minutes. Now, you can combine an immersion suit with a life jacket, provided the life jacket actually goes over the immersion suit. Now, these suits are generally provided for the benefit of crew members as a last resort. They are the ones who are expected to stay behind and actually evacuate the passengers, so if they then need to escape in a pinch, an immersion suit could prevent them from succumbing to the cold. Now, this is a good one. You might think these are just here for show, but those round ring life buoys hanging up around the deck might just save your life one day. Just like the ones you might see on the beach and at swimming pools, life buoys are often fitted around the perimeter of ships' decks for quick usage by passengers or crew in the case of an emergency. Life rings are particularly effective in the case of having someone go overboard, when a flotation device needs to be deployed very quickly. So now that you've got your people away from the sinking ship and maybe in the water, we need to communicate our position. So an emergency position indicating radio beacon, or EPIRB for short, is pivotal in providing a rescue team with the exact location and the site of the disaster. Rescuers often have huge distances to cover, and the inability to visually locate a vessel or passenger in distress is a real concern, so beacons assist in allowing for the quick and accurate determination of a survivor's location. EPIRBs work by transmitting geographic coordinates via radio signals to a satellite receiver, allowing rescue activities to locate the disaster site accurately, effectively, and efficiently. Now, the signal will transmit that the vessel is actually in distress, as well as the coordinates via its inbuilt GPS system. Now, it's mandatory for all ships to carry an EPIRB, and they're normally mounted in a secure, easily accessible location on the ship, like on the bridge or in the ship's mast. An EPIRB should only be set off in a distress situation and can be activated manually by a button or automatically when they float free of a sinking vessel. Now, like the automatic function on a life raft, the EPIRB comes with a hydrostatic release unit, allowing for it to be released and float to the surface in the case of a ship sinking below 4 meters. Now, while the EPIRB plays a very important role, giving a quick and accurate relaying of the vessel's location, a SART plays a bit of a different role. This is actually used for relaying the ship's location to other ships in the immediate vicinity, and it can also mark out individual lifeboats and survival craft in the water. A search and rescue transponder, or SART for short, sends out a distress signal to nearby vessels. These marvels of human technology are one of the ship's best friends in any survival situation. Passenger and cargo ships will have at least 2 SARTs on board, as well as there being one on each survival craft. Now, these battery-operated devices are made of waterproof components, which keep them protected from any water damage, sunlight, and other extreme weather conditions. They can both receive and transmit radio signals. They're manually activated, and they respond when being triggered. For example, it activates when a ship's radar hits it. This can help preserve the battery life, so it's not always on. When it detects a radar pulse, the SART will send a signal that comes up on a rescue ship or plane's radar. Now, the signal that the rescue ship receives won't identify the vessel in distress, but it will display the position of the SART with 12 trailing dots on the screen, which then become dashes as the vessel gets closer before finally becoming concentric circles around the SART's location. It's simple stuff, but it works very well. Now, one of the more manual and traditional modes for attracting attention of rescuers is via signals, using hand flares, and even rockets. Now, you may be familiar with flares being misused in sporting events, but rest assured their primary purpose still rests with maritime safety and search and rescue operations. The SOLAS convention requires that ships carry 12 rockets on the bridge, and 4 rockets are fitted in life rafts and lifeboats. A standard parachute flare is designed to be fired vertically to a height of 300 meters, that's almost 1,000 feet, and burn for at least 40 seconds as it slowly descends to be effectively spotted by rescue vessels and personnel. Now, these can be visible from 5 to 8 nautical miles away, and they can actually continue to burn under a bit of water. Now, their design ensures that they are watertight, safe to use, and easy to handle. The active ingredients used to create flares mean that they most commonly burn red. Strontium nitrate gives the flare its vibrant color, potassium perchlorate helps the strontium burn even faster, and magnesium helps it burn very brightly. Now, the final and probably the most important piece of life-saving equipment that you'll find on a ship today are probably the communication systems. So being able to alert everyone aboard the ship with necessary steps and instructions is of the utmost importance, and the first step to keeping everyone safe. All ships are fitted with general alarm systems to summon and alert their crew to designated fire or boat stations. Portable VHF radios or walkie-talkies are usually provided to emergency crew for communication throughout the ship. With numbers aboard a ship in the thousands and thousands nowadays, communication to passengers and crew is no easy feat. Passenger vessels are equipped with public address systems for this as well, so a single message can go out through the whole ship very quickly. Very high frequency, or VHF radio, is the most common and versatile form of marine communication. It can actually be used between ships, shore stations, and via satellite. They can send and receive messages, weather conditions, and other important information, including distress signals. Communication systems are absolutely vital to the safety of those at sea. I cannot stress that point enough, and without them, confusion would reign absolute supreme. All of these systems combine to create an environment at sea that's actually extremely safe. Evacuating huge passenger ships is today an orderly and highly efficient process. Crew on cruise ships perform near daily drills and exercises to make sure they're kept up to scratch on all that equipment. It means that all of the terrible disasters we've covered on this channel before actually helped guide safety standards today and ensure travelling at sea is a less terrifying experience. Whew, well, with all that in mind, you can now comfortably go back to your pina colada and enjoy your relax by the pool. But just don't forget where your lifeboat is stored, just in case. This is the MV Ever Given. You might remember it from making the news a couple of years ago when it became stuck in the Suez Canal. Now, this ship is an absolute behemoth, one of the largest in the world. It's as long as 3 football fields, 400 metres or 1,312 feet, and as wide as 23 London buses parked next to each other. The ship displaces 265,876 tonnes. Now that's as much as 130 World War II era American Fletcher-class destroyers or 5 Titanics. The sheer scale of the thing is hard to comprehend, and just as you start to get your mind around it, you then realise that it can hit speeds of up to 22.8 knots or 26.2 miles per hour. That's more than 40 kilometres per hour. And when something that big is moving at the speed of a family car in a small city street, it's no wonder that occasionally accidents can happen. But how do you even stop a ship the size of the Ever Given? How long does it even take to slow down from top speed, and how on earth are these beasts of the ocean controlled at all? Ships are often lauded for their speed. Since the early days of sail, the amount of sails a ship could carry and the lines of its hull could dictate just how quickly that vessel could cross the world's oceans. Now, obviously this was important for many different reasons, be they escaping enemy warships in combat, or privateers, the state-sanctioned pirates that would hunt the valuable merchant ships down. Even just delivering things on time, shaving off days or weeks to a long voyage, is something we might now take for granted. Bringing a sailing ship like that to a stop, either on approach to port or maybe to render assistance at sea, was usually a matter of heaving to, where the wind is being driven head-on against the forward side of one of the main sails, and the ship can be driven into the wind to stop any forward momentum at all. A variation of this is used as a quick emergency stop to respond to man overboard situations on sailing ships to this day. But once powerful steam engines were implemented on ships in the early 1800s, it changed the game entirely. With the introduction of iron and steel-hulled vessels, ships suddenly became way bigger than they had been during the glory years of sail, from 2,000 to 20,000 tons, and, equipped with massive expansion steam engines, these ships were generating a lot of forward momentum. By Titanic's day, the Oceanliner was prized for its speed, and ships raced across the Atlantic to set records for the shortest crossings, but bringing these ships to a stop was no simple task. We all know the Titanic's stopping capabilities were really tested on the night of April 14th, 1912, when the ship encountered its infamous iceberg. But emergency stopping was a standard procedure that was tested during Titanic's sea trials just a couple of weeks earlier. The sea trials are the standard tests of a brand new ship that are conducted to check that it performs adequately before the final product is officially handed over from builder to new owner. Now, Titanic underwent about 12 hours of tests which monitored how well she could turn and get up to speed, but the trials also put her under a crash stop or an emergency stop. Now, the basic principle was to reverse the ship's engines from full ahead to full astern. By reversing the engines, the propeller's direction would, of course, also reverse, and the pitch or angle of the ship's fixed propeller blades would then begin to act as a kind of braking force as the ship plunged ahead at its top speed of 21 knots. That's 24 miles per hour, or just shy of 39 kilometers per hour. Now, with the engines suddenly thrown into reverse, Titanic's 52,000-ton bulk was still surging ahead, and it would take a good amount of time, or rather distance, for the propellers to be able to bring the ship to a stop. Now, that much momentum, going at that much speed, is monstrously difficult to bring under control, let alone halt entirely. It took Titanic 3 minutes and 15 seconds to come to a stop, having travelled some 850 yards, or a full 777 meters. Now, that's 3 times the ship's own length. Now, this does sound like a huge distance, and it is to some extent, but all things considered, as you will soon find out, that's actually quite impressive. She could stop at nearly full speed in under a kilometre and far less than a mile. If a passenger fell overboard, the ship would stop only 3 ship lengths away, meaning recovery of the passenger was quite probable. In normal operations, Titanic should have been equipped to deal with almost all emergencies, but of course, on that moonless night she encountered the iceberg, the crew simply didn't have enough time to react. In fact, the most recent evidence suggests that Titanic's first officer, William Murdoch, wasn't trying to bring Titanic to a complete crash stop by reversing the engines. He simply ordered them to stop, possibly planning to slow the ship's progress, but to use its massive forward momentum to glide around the iceberg. Tragically, they almost made it. Of course, things have changed since Titanic's day, and ships are almost inconceivably larger. Ever Given, that we saw earlier, is 5 times bigger than Titanic. So how do ships like that handle at sea? Well, of course, it all comes down to their propulsion. Surprisingly, big ships like Ever Given usually only have 1 engine and 1 propeller, but it's not just any engine. Ever Given has a Mitsui MAN B&W diesel engine that outputs 59,300 kilowatts of raw power. Now, engines like this have almost ridiculous specifications, and if you're into like motors or engines or anything at all, this will blow your mind. A 950mm or 37.4-inch bore, 3460mm or 136-inch stroke, outputting up to 6,800 kilowatts per cylinder. Now, if you're not into engines, suffice it to say, those are some pretty impressive numbers. Back in Titanic's day, reciprocating steam engines of similar size could generate about 15,000 horsepower compared to Ever Given's 79,500. Now, it's enough to push that ship through the water at 22.8 knots. Now, bringing a ship like this to an emergency stop is no easy task. In fact, performing emergency stops puts a huge amount of strain on the engines, the propellers and their shafts, and especially the thrust block assembly. The thrust block is the device that actually harnesses the propeller's thrust and transfers it into the hull of the ship itself, rather than allow the force to push straight through the engine. Of course, getting something in excess of 220,000 tons to stop in record time, with the engines now suddenly running at full speed in reverse, will put a massive strain on the entire assembly. In fact, tests show that it's actually better, if time and distance allow it, to simply reduce the engine speed, like downshifting on a car, in steps and throwing the wheel hard over with each step, the action of which will naturally bleed speed off and take pressure off the machinery. But for a proper emergency crash stop, a fully laden modern bulk carrier can take as little as 1.3 miles or 2 kilometers to as much as 3.8 miles or 6 kilometers to come to a stop. Now, this is all to do with the inertia and the sheer mass of modern cargo ships which displace all those hundreds of thousands of tons of water. To that end, when a modern large cargo ship is approaching its destination, it will begin to slow down 50 miles or 80 kilometers away from its destination port. Now, this means that the ship will be at a very slow and controllable speed once it finally arrives, where a pilot, who's a trained specialist, whose job it is to actually guide the ship into any unfamiliar harbour, can easily step aboard, and then tugboats can rush out and take the ship under control and actually maneuver it into the port. Now, even simply stopping the engines without reversing them on a large bulk carrier, a maneuver known as an inertia stop, will mean the massive forward momentum of the ship could take over 11 miles or 17.7 kilometers to stop it. But for day-to-day operations of big ships, it's actually absolutely imperative that the vessel doesn't stop at all in busy waters. A ship needs some speed, called headway, to be able to actually maneuver themselves in the first place. Without that bit of headway, the ship could become uncontrollable and not respond to rudder commands. Tugboats will come alongside big ships and guide them into harbour at speeds in excess of 5 knots. Any less than this, and big ships like tankers would be incapable of manoeuvring themselves into turns. Now, in the case of emergencies on the approach to harbours, modern ships can execute a last-minute stopping procedure called emergency anchoring. Now, of course, these can't be used in the open ocean where it's too deep, but in the shallow of a harbour, in the event of an emergency, the engines can be thrown into full astern or reverse, and the anchors could be dropped where they, and more importantly, their massive, heavy chains, would drag along the sea floor and act like a brake to bring the ship to a stop in record time. Now, obviously, this puts a monumental strain on the machinery and the winches which are designed to handle the anchors, and it's extremely dangerous for any crew nearby. But in an emergency, it would be better to damage the machinery than lose the ship. Now, this actually happened in 2002. A fully loaded tanker was coming into port, but her draft had been incorrectly recorded. The uneven trim, which resulted in a half-metre more draft forward, resulted in the ship not responding to rudder commands below 5 knots. Putting the engines astern appeared to not do anything. Now, it seemed like a collision with the dock might be unavoidable, so the pilot ordered the ship's anchors let go, but only partially. His order wasn't followed, and the anchors were actually let completely out. With just 10 metres or 33 feet to spare, the ship drew to a halt, and a collision was narrowly avoided. Now, that's all well and good, but it may surprise you to know that in the past, tests were actually run on fitting actual brakes to the sides of ships. Back in the early 1900s, the US Navy's warships had suddenly exploded in size, reaching up to 25,000 tons and beyond. Their massive battleships were very difficult to control and stop, and solutions were sought to make it easier for the crews. Ship brakes had actually been patented in the 1870s and fitted to smaller vessels, but at the turn of the century, clerk and would-be inventor Louis Lacoste came up with a large, advanced brake designed for bigger ships. The idea was to fit the ship with a kind of massive door, one on each side, which would normally sit flush with the hull, but which could be extended outwards and interrupt the flow of water. Tests on a small Canadian steamer of 250 tons, the Eureka, could bring it to a stop in less than 100 feet. Now, the US Navy was dubious of this invention to say the least, but thanks to Lacoste's political connections, President Theodore Roosevelt ordered the invention to be tested on the USS Indiana, a battleship. Now, tests proved dismal. Not only did it fail to bring the ship to a short stop, but over time it could easily become clogged with marine growth and slow the ship down when it wasn't meant to. But critically, it also added a lot of unnecessary weight. Now, a newspaper reported that officers of the Navy have very little regard for the brake. The idea was dropped, And that was the effective end of the ship break. So there you have it. In normal operation, modern-day heavy vessels will begin to slow down many miles away from their destination, but in an emergency it can still take them a long way to come to a stop. If you're a small boat owner, or you fancy taking your tinny fishing boat out on the weekend, it might be a good reminder to stay out of shipping lanes, because if you're accidentally straying into their path and they start a crash stop from miles away, chances are they will still cruise right over the top of you. So maybe keep clear. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we get new videos out weekly. If you want to support my work and get really cool perks like behind the scenes and early access, please visit my Patreon in the link in the description below, or sign up as a YouTube member. Come and join the crew. And as always, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you again next time.